Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning! Welcome to the beginner's guide to how to use debuffs effectively in Tactics Ogre Reborn, where to get them, how to use them, and why they are the ultimate power in this game, effectively speaking. So here's the thing. When it comes to debuffs, they come in many forms. They can be applied in many different ways. Some can be guaranteed, some can't. Some can have a minimum guarantee, some can have a maximum guarantee. Some can have, longer or shorter durations, but they all have a part to play. So that's what we're going to go ahead and start covering here. Now, first of all, let's go ahead and cover the Warren Ford section of the debuffs, because personally I find it really funny that one of the least used debuffs is actually the first one on the list. I'm going to go over pretty much the different debuffs in order of how likely you are to run into them, how to counter them, how to apply them, and all of that kind of thing. So, without any further ado, let's get into it. Right off the bat, let's go ahead and start off with stun. So stun is going to be coming from any of your heavy bird units. It's going to be coming from any of your upgraded Damask equipment. It's going to be coming from Paralytic Wave on casters, and additionally it will be coming from a few other abilities as well. So for example, Howl on a Cyclops, or the Paralysis Blade ability on the White Knights. Now stun will have a roughly 50% chance to cause the unit to fumble their main action. Essentially, they'll just fail to attack somebody, they'll fail to heal something, they just will fail their primary action. Now, bear in mind, this doesn't actually affect the action phase of the turn, which is weird to say, as in, like, their main action and their action phase are two separate things. Any of those skills that are marked in red are not going to be subject to that ability, so for example, if you're using Stun to try to prevent a Necromancer from using Condemn, that will still end up getting through, but stun is a universal ability that will affect just about everybody. Very few things are actually immune to stun. Even when stuff is resistant to stun, it's one of the most easy to guarantee abilities in the game, especially things like the paralysis arrows off of a ninja, or using Eagle Eye with either a short bow or Damask upgraded bow on an archer, or any of the Damask weapons with something like a Mighty Strike or a Vigorous Attack will guarantee that stun effect. Just so we're not repeating it a million times, just know that when I say that a weapon can potentially apply an effect, Mighty Impact, Terrifying, or not Terrifying, but Fearful Impact, Vigorous Attack, Eagle Eye, and Tremendous Shot all will guarantee their effects. Basically, anything that says 100% in the description will also guarantee the debuff of the weapon being used if it has one. So, just we're not repeating that a million times, just know that that is always going to be the case. Stun is going to be available on just about every single Damascus weapon, because if you've ever seen a Damask weapon in real life, that metal is looking pretty stunning. I love that pun, and I love that it was kept there in the remake. Anyway, let's continue on. You also have Stun Dart blowguns, and again, probably the one that you'll probably run into the most is when it comes to Howl coming off of the Cyclops. Any Cyclops going and kind of getting into the mush, so to speak, will typically end up stunning multiple units at once. And on your end, if you're using something like Concentration to guarantee at least 30% hit odds on a Terror Knight, the fact that it attacks in an AoE with Paralytic Wave will mean that this is a fantastic way to basically ruin turn economy on the opposite side. Terror Knights can hit reasonably hard, but also just keeping them around, causing their token debuff as well as throwing around stun can honestly be way more oppressive than any amount of attack damage that they would be throwing in otherwise. We'll get to Fear in a moment, because honestly Fear is the strongest debuff in the game, but let's go ahead and continue on here. So next up is going to be is going to be Sleep. You typically won't end up seeing this one come up that often. There's a few automatic abilities that will cause Sleep, as well as a few items like Orbs. Just know that just about every orb has a debuff effect of some kind on there. But Sleep is just going to put a unit to sleep. It's just going to knock them down on the ground. They won't be able to do anything. The next attack that hits them will wake them up, or they'll just wake up after a little bit of time. This is going to be handy on your own end for something like Terror Knights, just randomly throwing out a sleep in order to try to put a threatening unit out of their turn. Can be a really cost-effective way to stop a lot of damage from coming in, especially once you're getting into the post-game. Honestly, I feel stuff like sleep oftentimes gets no pun intended, kind of slept on when you're looking at those cases where you've rolled your concentration, you've got your 30% hit odds, you've got those, double upgraded, friggin' mega cockatrices coming in, and they're going to just come in and they're going to destroy half your team and put the rest out of commission, and then suddenly you just took your, cheap 20 MP move and put them to sleep. It's a very effective thing. So either way, just kind of keep it in your back pocket. Again, really handy on Terror Knights in particular. Let's go ahead and move on. So Charm is another debuff that is super oppressive throughout the entire game here. Just allows you to functionally mind control something. There's a lot of weapons that have this on there, like the Wart Dart blowgun, the Cupid bowgun, or not the Cupid bowgun, but the Cupid bow, which if you are unfamiliar, once you end up getting your bow crafting books and what have you from the temples, you'll simply just go take any of the random crescents that you've probably gotten at that point, upgrade them into Cupid bows, and there you go. Now you use your Eagle Eye on there, and you have guaranteed mind control with every shot. Fantastic. You also have this available on your casters. Usually it's going to be a little bit less reliable in their case. You also have Deneb with the Witch class, which can automatically inflict charm on any female units any male units nearby her. Either way, great ability for, once again, taking those big hits that would have come your way, turning them around on the other guy. Great way to just cause a lot of chaos. If you can, for example, hit a heavy unit, or any unit that's running some heavier weaponry off in the backfield, like, again, Cupid Bow is great for this, but essentially you fire it off into their backfield, you cause those units to start fighting amongst each other long before they ever even got into the fight. It's a great way to kind of disperse any incoming damage and what have you. One thing to actually note on this is that the AI is aware that Charm is a thing that exists. This means two things. First of all, if you do equip multiple Charm Bow archers, they actually will not shoot on a charmed target unless it's with a finisher that they think they've got a pretty solid advantage on. So for example, if it's like a water unit and they're like, oh shoot, I can hit that guy for like a 700 right now, they might go ahead and take that attack, but for the most part, when they're attacking with their primary shots, they know to avoid charmed targets. This also applies to anything using charmed blowguns or the charm whip, the rosebud. And additionally, when it comes to your own units, if you're worried about stuff like fairies charming you with their virtuous dance, actually, fairies and angels are probably going to be the scariest thing, at least on your end, in terms of what you can do with charm. Both of them are a very high chance, potentially, especially if you're using a black lizard powder, abilities to charm multiple units at once, whereas on the incoming side, you'll typically only see something like virtuous dance, which will, again, potentially have the chance to charm different units. Additionally, you'll also see this on the bow finisher, specifically the fire one. So if you have any units that are running ice, consider putting a Zoliadrot on them, so that they will automatically attempt to cure themselves of their own charm. It's a little bit of a funny thing to run into, but yeah, if you have any ice units, they might get hit by that fire finisher, they might get hit by that charm, which means that yes, they'll waste a turn when they're hit, but they won't be going and attacking your own guys. Alright, next up. Actually, to probably explain this a little bit, any unit that's charmed, their first priority is still going to be for themselves, so if they do have an item that allows them to get rid of their debuff, they're like, oh shoot, that's pretty important, I should get rid of that, and then they'll go and use that item rather than attacking. Alright, next is Petrify. You typically won't see this on too many things until you get into the post-game. Now, there's certainly cockatrices all throughout the game, but cockatrices, just like in Ogre Battle 64, and in their various variants, are potentially going to be the scariest possible unit to run into on the enemy side here. Again, especially the upgraded ones, which basically have a guaranteed chance to petrify. Now, this is one of those abilities that's so unfortunate to run into that it's one of the few resistance abilities that they actually left in the game, because in many cases you might potentially want to run Resist Petrify just to have any chance to not have your team get thoroughly smacked in the post-game. Again, I feel like many folks will essentially quit the game at Chapter 4 thinking the story ended, that's about it, missing that the post-game is about 10 times as long. Anyway, so, as far as Petrify goes, it just disables the unit outright, gives them additional defense, and prevents them from being knocked backwards in most cases. In cases where, for example, you have a heavy beast unit landing a knockback hit on a statued unit, they still would be able to throw them off a cliff. Basically, if something's strong enough, they would just be able to throw them off. Additionally, it should be noted that if something's petrified and they're knocked off a cliff, even if they have the ability to fly, they will just be dead. And additionally, it's also notable that, yeah, cockatrices are very, very fast. There's a reason that I constantly mention that chickens are scary in the postgame. Petrify is definitely the case why. You clumped up any of your units, you potentially have lost potentially up to 5 units over the course of a single action, and you better bet they're going to double turn you, especially just due to the fact that they start having really high health pools, they start being difficult to counter, and in most cases they'll be double rounding your entire party. Alright, so now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's go ahead and continue on to some of the other ones and how you might potentially run into them. So, in terms of other debuffs, let's go ahead and say we've got, just a note here, poison is going to be available from a whole ton of sources, but poison is scarier than it would be in most RPGs out there. In this particular case, it scales throughout the game, meaning that it's always going to do 10% of maximum health per tick. That means the higher health something has, the higher damage this will do. Now, early on, this might mean that, they're only taking a little bit of a trickle damage. Maybe they're dealing like a third of a hit, or as much as a hit, or, something like that. Once you start getting into the late game, that's when you start running into those situations where, health pools are in the thousands, and easily that poison can be doing more than any of your regular hits. So just so you know, that it ends up getting better and better as the game progresses. As far as poison goes, it's available on many, many weapons. Probably the easiest is the Tiger Buck Knock, which you can put next to let's say a soldier. You take a Berserker, you put them next to a soldier, you have them use their Vigorous. That Vigorous then transfers over to the Berserker, who has his Berserk activated, and now you have a 100% chance to inflict poison on several units at once. This actually also applies to the stun effect off the Damask Claws, by the way. Basically, any effect like this will work. But either way, Tiger Claws remain a solid weapon into the post-game. Earlier on, you have the Cat Claws for a similar effect, but just slightly worse stats. At any rate, this essentially will again bleed out multiple units at once. Now, this isn't something that you use as a primary damage source, which, by the way, I should point out. We also have stuff like the Scorpion over here that's going to have it. We also have the Dragon Fang over here that's going to have it. And additionally, here, let's just go show this so that we see them in their colored up versions. And additionally, typically the version that you'll end up seeing the most will be coming off of your sword finishers, with Vile Wound being a very, very reliable way to apply this from anyone that uses a sword whatsoever. It's actually one of the reasons that Knights are incredibly strong in the late game, just creating these situations where they can tank a lot of hits, they can survive a lot of things a lot of other units can't survive. Go ahead and slap some Resist Petrify on there, go have them take on that Cockatrice, drop that Vile Wound, and realistically, sure, you might see some fancier numbers coming out of your Dragoons and whatnot, but in their particular case, they might have to get close, they might have to activate all their abilities, whereas, for example, something like a Vile Wound is going to be a lot easier to potentially apply off a lot of units in a more general sense. Also, it just occurred to me that I forgot to bring up that the octopus can also do long-range breaches and long-range poisons, so also something to consider. And also, have been told multiple times to do that whole standard thing where you gotta tell people to do, like, go do the subscribe button thing and do the like button thing and, I don't know, mention some random story over how a debuff completely screwed you over or something. Gotta do the whole engagement thing, and then hopefully stuff takes off a little bit faster and all of that kind of stuff. Which, honestly, stuff's going on, like, way better than I ever would have expected to begin with. But hey, they say you gotta do that kind of stuff. Also, technically Patreon exists, but honestly, it's like one of those things you always kind of feel bad about asking, because it's like, this is a fun hobby I already enjoy doing, but it's like, hey, would you like to donate for that anyway? It's legalized panhandling! Alright, where did I put my Valkyrie? I know I had them sitting around here somewhere. There you are. Okay. So, generally speaking, again, there's going to be a lot of ways to apply this finisher. Blowgun finishers actually also have this. The poison blow darts are also a thing that exists. Where's my ninja? Here's my ninja. So, for example, if you are looking for a consistent way to apply poison, ninjas are probably the most common way to do this. You've got Envenom coming in on their abilities, meaning any one of their attacks will cause a guaranteed chance of poison. It won't check for anything or anything along those lines. So if you wanted to roll a chance for both stun and poison, you can run something like a short bow or a damask bow. Honestly, the damage doesn't matter. They're there for the poison and the stun. And that will give you a chance to drop both those debuffs at the same time. But essentially, any attack that they do will have that Envenom effect on there. And additionally, again, Venom Sting will be down here in the finishers, which also will have a chance to apply the debuff. In terms of how it can be guaranteed, same old vigorous things, same old... well, actually, there aren't any kind of standard shooting methods outside of the blowguns. So you can use Eagle Eye on a blowgun. You can use any of your guaranteed melee hits on your melee weapons. This is actually one of those things that makes it a pretty solid choice to run something like this, where, for example, you're going and you're fighting late game beasts or what have you, and if you have a unit that's already fairly strong, you can afford to run a lower stat weapon like something like a Scorpion. Essentially, take that Beast Bane plus Beast Slayer combo, throw it on there, and then that will guarantee the poison as well, allowing them to be finished off, so you can finish them off with one hit that technically takes a little bit longer to tick than trying to set up the Fear, Bane, Slayer, Breach combo in order to drop something like this. Obviously, do whatever feels appropriate for your particular team, but just something to consider. So essentially, poison, again, will affect heavier targets a lot easier or a lot more prevalently than your lower health ones. And additionally, it should be noted that Dragon's Eye and Poison Breath off something like the Hydra can also poison just about everything. Most bosses are going to be immune to poison, though this isn't 100% true. There's a lot of early game bosses like Chapter 1 and 2 and whatnot that will be susceptible to poison. There are just some other scattered ones here and there. It's pretty much just Death Proof that blocks it. Boss status does not block poison. So again, I think even Zybos can be poisoned. But it's a very reliable debuff. It can be guaranteed so many ways. And it's easily one of the strongest kind of convenient damage-dealing things that there is, because even if the thing doesn't die, bear in mind that damage doesn't always have to be for the purpose of making something dead. For example, let's say something like we have our Dragon's Eye, we have our dash, and we have our poison right here, right? So this guy rolls his dash, he rolls his Dragon's Eye, he rolls his scales, he runs forward, right? It doesn't matter how much damage he does, he's essentially caused 3 units to have dot damage for an extended period. Now typically this will last about 2-3 rounds, and typically will tick roughly 2 to 3 times per each of those rounds. The specifics of this vary. Essentially heavier units, slower units will be more affected, they'll have more ticks per round, whereas the lighter units will have their turns come up more quickly, meaning that they may not get as many ticks. Either way, we're looking at a case where this guy has suddenly caused multiple units to essentially start bleeding out at the same time. Now, logistically speaking, a lot of the times you'll essentially see the AI forced into this decision of do they want to kind of heal in one location or heal in multiple locations. The multiple location heal is going to be less effective, and it's going to end up costing more, meaning that if you are, for example, trying to cause, like, let's say, endgame units to burn through a lot of their healing items at the same time, poison can be a very, very effective way to cause them to burn through all their healing salves and stuff like that before the fights ever really even started. If you ever have challenges in something like Coda 4, which I realize that we're talking to a lot of new players right now, Coda 4 is like hundreds of hours into the game, but even in cases where there's all of these really strong units carrying a bunch of healing items with them and whatnot, just a couple of poisons would be enough to completely take that off the table. So just something to consider there as well. And as far as casters go, again, same old concentration thing applies, where any of your standard casters would be able to use something like your Poison Clouds over here to, with concentration, guarantee at least minimum % hit odds, and in many cases they're going to be able to do it fairly quickly. For example, actually, one of the fastest ways to spread poison around is to take somebody like a wizard right here, conserve RT, concentration, meditate, and then you go ahead and throw something like a poison cloud on there, and you just spam fire. You don't move, you don't go anywhere, you just spam fire poison, and you're going to see the entire map melting before your eyes. So very effective thing to drop in that particular situation. And anyway, let's go ahead and move on. So next up on our list is going to be Breach. So there's Breach and Enfeeble. These are essentially two different sides of the same coin. And this is going to be one of your, by far, most effective ways to deal damage to stuff. So if you ever heard somebody running into those cases where they're in late game, they're not doing damage to stuff, they're wondering if they just did their stats wrong or something, no, late game is when you really, really want to be taking a lot of those things that you could have learned earlier on into the game and apply them more liberally. So for example, stuff like Breach plus Fear here on this Terror Knight effectively means that something will be one-shot by the next arrow that comes their way. So Breach effectively multiplies incoming damage by about 50%. I don't know if that changes based on its situation or not. And at the same time, we've got Fear, which actually will tie into this one, because you'll usually see these two combined. So Breach will vastly intensify incoming damage, while Fear reduces all thresholds for the unit. So this effectively means that you can say that they took 15% off all stats, give or take. There's, as far as exactly how all of that stuff with Fear works, there's a lot to it. Honestly, the easiest way is just to say they lose 15% on everything, which means that a lot of their defense is just straight up ignored in that particular case, which is why, for example, if you ever wondered why your archers weren't doing very much, it's because they can actually do a ton, it just depends on the situation. Any armor breaks affect them, way harder than everybody else for the most part. At least in the initial phase, it's arguable for later on. But Fear, Breach, Enfeeble, which you'll see from other sources as well, those are going to be your main ways to just completely break a unit and melt their health away from nothing. Honestly, health pools later on, even though they end up going higher, even though units end up getting tougher, Breach, Fear, and Enfeeble, those are your ways to completely delete stuff within a couple of attacks. Alright? No questions asked. No, it wasn't your stats, it was your debuffs. Apply those debuffs, you'll end up just going and mushing stuff into paste like it's nothing. Like I said, one of my favorite combinations to this day, from since launch day up till now, Terror Knight with either a Zweihander or a Claymore. I prefer the Zweihander in this case because it's slightly faster to swing, but either way, both of them will have this Breach effect on there. Using something like Fearful Impact guarantees that Breach as well as attaching Fear, so they are reducing their defenses by 15% and also multiplying that incoming damage by another 50%. So, needless to say, that number has a tendency to go nutty. Fear by itself can take a, let's say, 50 shot from a longbow and go and transform it into a 300. Then you have Breach coming in and suddenly, oh shoot, let's say, obviously we're ballparking here, but let's say that shot does 450 now, right? But now all of a sudden, wait, we want to put Tremendous on there. Oh, look, now suddenly they're to a 900. Now we go ahead and double on that. Now we throw an Instill on that. And again, now they're doing thousands. They previously did 50. This gets carried away very quick, so if you wanted to know how to melt stuff throughout any phase of the game, Breach, Fear, and Enfeeble will do the trick. Fear applies both offensively and defensively to both physical, magical, whatever. It just destroys the unit outright. Terror Knights are going to be your primary source of inflicting this. A Gonal Scream from a Gremlin will do it as well. But in this particular case... Oh, actually, the Gloom Orb will also do this as well. Lament of the Dead is a very reliable way to drop it wherever you want. Fearful Impact is a great way to guarantee that you're going to put it wherever you'd like. So use those as you will. And additionally, again, if you are looking to get more damage from anything, that's Fear. Now, Fear is one of those few cases where many, I would say the vast majority of boss units are actually immune to Fear. If they are officially classed by the game as a leader, they will not be hit by Fear. They cannot be hit by it whatsoever. Funnily enough, Denim does not get this bonus. He's a bit of a chicken shit, I guess, but either way, most units that are classed as a boss can't be hit by Fear. This is why, when you get into Coda 4 and you're fighting, a hell of a lot of bosses at the same time, many of them will suddenly be able to be inflicted by Fear when they couldn't their first time around, just because they're no longer classed as a boss. So this means you can use the Breach Fear combo even into the hardest fight in the game. Just know that something like Breach and Enfeeble, nothing actually has the ability to resist those. So anything that has those red icons on there, so Breach, Enfeeble, Slow, most things most things can be hit by stun, but usually the ones with the red icons cannot be resisted by anything. They cannot be resisted, they can't be made immune against. That will just always work, they'll always be reliable. I should probably also mention at this point that this is one of those ones that's able to be reliably inflicted with a 100% hit chance from an item. So like Dynast King's Mead will be a 100% chance to inflict Breach. So early on and throughout the entire game, if you wanted to spend a little bit of money to see something get absolutely thoroughly melted, that's when you would go and apply something like this, where you've got a Breach that you can suddenly use to combo in with any other attack that you'd like. So like, let's say you had a unit, you wanted it gone, the most reliable combo throughout most of the game is essentially a Breach and or Fear, and then go and apply a ranged weapon to it. Since ranged weapons do have some of the hardest hits in the game, they're just held back by not being able to penetrate armor initially. So this effectively means that it's a great way to delete stuff. Now, if you wanted to inflict Enfeeble, there's ways to do that as well. But let's go ahead and actually take a quick little moment here to talk about your buff and debuff items and what makes them important. So Arion Plumes are going to be a little bit of a buff. I think it's roughly like 15% offense towards the unit using it. It lasts a decently long time. It's going to be fairly reliable, but reasonably it's not going to be enough to like vastly sway a fight in its own favor. This is just a convenient, cheap setup item that you can throw on. Like, let's say you're going and trying to sneak a unit around the field. You can just quickly slap this on there. It takes almost no time to use. They're pretty cheap to get a hold of. You just kind of can use that whenever. Base enough time will be Fortify. This will just cause you to, again, same thing as with Strengthen here, just to resist incoming damage a little bit. It's not going to be anything too major, but still, it can be the difference between life and death in, more extreme situations. Spirit Stone is going to apply Spellcraft, which again, just like Strengthen, is going to give you a slight boost. This isn't going to be the equivalent exactly to something like a Magi Up card or a Fizz Up card for these two. But still, it will be a decent chunk of increase to your overall damage. You probably have them for free. It is what it is. Fairy Skill Powder will cause healing to essentially max out its potential. Now, as weird as this sounds, healing actually has a sort of maximum potential that it caps out at, where it's going to be a combination of mind, of prevailing element, of the unit's equipment, of their affinity and what have you. But whatever way you decide to go with it, it essentially is going to cap out at a certain point. So, for example, Major Heal 2 will normally heal, like, let's say it does like 190, 180, 190-ish in its basic form. You apply a Blessing on there, it's going to be like 380, 390-ish, and then you apply this Healcraft on there, and now they're doing 460, 470-ish. It's not a mind-blowing amount of increase, but it's enough, and it lasts long enough to be pretty noticeable if you're using a lot of area heals. So if you have a unit that's healing a lot, this will affect all basic healing sources, so whether it's from your clerics, your sword masters, or anything like that, it will improve their healing a decent bit. I actually forgot to check if this improves Pumpkin Pie or not. I don't think it does. Pumpkin Pie is a bit of a meme move. I don't think this would affect it, but hey, I'll try it out later. Okay, Resilience is going to be the same thing as Fortify, except versus magical stuff. True Strike is going to increase your melee accuracy. This is usually not much of a gigantic issue. If you are fighting in swamps or in heavy storms, this will cause your hit rates to be higher than the other guy. This is why Canopus comes in with the True Strike ability, for example. Generally, you won't see this come up very often, though it is very useful on something like a Gremlin, whose Coquettish Kiss ability is incredibly strong but really inaccurate. So this does have some edge use cases. You typically won't see it come up that often. Alright, next you have Jewel of the Avatar, one of the most useful buff items that there is. So essentially, Jewel of the Avatar will guarantee minimum 20% block odds for whatever you're doing, either dodge or block, whatever's relevant in, whatever the attack is. This means versus anything physical. So, for example, if they're dodging finishers, they're dodging melee attacks, what have you, this is very, very, very handy to keep on hold of a lot of units. Like if you are, for example, taking... probably the most recent use case that I've had for this was an Angel Knight, or just any of your frontliners, and you want to have them go run a flank for you. You want them to go run around the side, and they're going to be away from your support a little bit. You don't necessarily want to detach your support to go, support them at a distance. Alright, oh man, kind of accidentally choked there a little bit. Anyway, so this will allow, for example, like a flanking unit to go and have a pretty decent chance to go and dodge incoming attacks. Bear in mind that the dodge rate on this is basically the same effect as like a parry 3, and you can just stack the two on top of another. This means that any unit running both parry and dodge can actually have a pretty solid chance to repeatedly go and just prevent multiple attacks from hitting them. I know it doesn't sound like much, but this is an absolutely crucial tool as you get on later and later on. Like, this item by itself can cause a lot of fights that feel unwinnable to be absolutely winnable. Just one of the most important ones to keep on mind. Always keep these in stock. If you need stuff to be dodging, any kind of physical attacks whatsoever, keep this in mind. It is absolutely massive. 20% is nothing to scoff at. Alright, next up we got Hair of the Unicorn with True Flight. This is rarely, if ever, going to come up. The one use case that I've ever found for this is in the case of something like a ninja running around in, let's say, Coda, not Coda, but running around in Chapter 4. And let's say they wanted to go and take on those kind of loot pinata dragons that have a chance to drop some rare equipment for you. And in a lot of cases, their guaranteed poison arrows are going to be the most effective way to do that. You just simply poison them and walk away. Realistically, they're on their own faction. Nobody's going to support them, so they can just die from poison while you're dealing with the rest of the fight. Now, in their particular case, they can guarantee concentration, so essentially all you would do is take their otherwise impossible... they're typically going to have like 30% hit odds to go and hit with one of their arrows due to stat discrepancies. So you apply something like this, you're going to have a far higher chance to hit. You go ahead and hit them with a poison arrow. You take their concentration, you take Shadowbind, and you just stop them in place. You have this dinky little ninja sit there and wait for this thing to bleed to death. That's really about it. So either way, handy use case for that. If there are other use cases, I don't know. This doesn't affect any kind of debuff hit odds or anything like that, just so you know. It's strictly just for the hit odds themselves. So, useful for taking out loot pinatas, but that's kind of about it. Next up, Filter of Ashes. Just like the Jewel of the Avatar, this is going to be very, very handy in some situations. If you're having issues with a Nibith fight early on, this might end up helping you a decent bit for avoiding those archers. I mean, look up the early parts of the Nothing Burger Challenge, or rather the very first episode of the Nothing Burger Challenge, to see how good this can be. Again, this is one of those cases where a lot of enemy archers will come in essentially cheating, so there's going to be a lot of cases where you yourself probably want to have sidestep available. So just something to consider. It can be very useful. Again, 20% chance to dodge those attacks can be a lifesaver. In the case of something like these filters, essentially just think of it as a smoke bomb. So pretty much what we're looking at is that, yeah, like if you're running into, let's say, Heaven General archers, or you're having trouble with Aracel, or if you're having trouble with, let's say, some of those Palace of the Dead archers or what have you, or you're going through Sand Bronze, Hanging Ruins, any of that, this is going to be, or Floating Ruins, rather. This is going to be a fairly useful tool for those situations. And okay, let's go ahead and continue on. Next up, probably the one that I end up using more than anything else. So Black Lizard Powder. This is going to give you an increase to your hit odds. This is going to do a Spell Strike. Now, if you have something running Concentration, you already have this automatically happening, so you can't stack the two on top of another. But in the case of Black Lizard Powder, this allows you to put Concentration on units that otherwise wouldn't have it. So, for example, something like an Angel Knight, something like a Swordmaster, any unit that you want to have hitting with 30% higher hit odds and minimum 30% hit odds. So, like Terror Knights already get Concentration, Swordmasters don't, so something like this is great for them. Cyclopes, they have a hard time generating MP, but something like this would allow them to use a lot of debuff abilities very effectively while effectively tanking for the party. So really, really, really useful tool right here. This doesn't mean that you have to pop them every single time, but whenever you're preparing, it can be very handy. Like, I know a lot of times I'll run a offhand Caldia for Clerics for chapters 1 through 4. This kind of falls off a little bit towards the Coda chapters, but effectively you can use this to set up the Caldia Charm effect for a 30% chance for a backfield charm. Can be pretty handy. It's not going to be a guaranteed thing by any means, and maybe you don't want to invest in that kind of thing, but it can make a massive difference when suddenly that cockatrice that was about to take out several of your guys goes and petrifies half the other team instead. Just something to consider. Anyway, moving on. So, Brand of the Sacrifice is your pretty much one-stop shop for making sure that boss does not delete you. So if you are running into those cases where you're wondering why that boss one-shot you, there's essentially two different ways that you can deal with it. For one thing, stop sending the ice unit versus the fire boss. Those elemental advantages are massive, which means that if they're hitting you with one of them, that unit's going to die. So there's a pretty good chance that's just going to be a bad idea for you. The game is balanced around many of these elements and things like that, so as long as the boss does not have an elemental advantage on you, they will not one-shot you. And yes, I'm even talking about clerics and things like that. It is balanced around that kind of stuff. So when it comes to Brand of the Sacrifice, this will reduce outgoing offense by 20%, I believe it was. But this is if you saw the recent kind of level 1 survival level 50 video, and that was with a level 50 with an element advantage versus the target there. Essentially, this took all endgame armor combined. Like, even with the the highest end weapons and armor and abusing a sort of shield glitch, it wasn't enough for that unit to survive, but this item alone was enough to take it down to 1 damage. So either way, this is a gigantic deal as far as reducing offense. Just causes a lot of units to be functionally impotent. This is something that you can get a renewable cheap form out of with the fire dragon. And actually, I probably should have mentioned that for some of these other ones too. If you want to see a if you want to see a unit repeatedly spamming out Weaken, get a Fire Dragon. If you want to see a unit repeatedly spamming out Breach, which is going to be the next one on the list here, which we already talked about, that's going to be your Water Dragon. And if you want a unit spamming out False Strike, that's going to be your Lightning Dragon. So I'm going to take a quick side step around these ones real quick. Spoil Spell and Spoil Heal are very niche. Like, for example, if you're having issues with Nibith early on, just throw one of these on him. It'll kind of screw up his odds to hit. And something like Spoil Heal will almost never actually come up. Just cause the unit to heal less. I mean, there might be some edge cases, like, later on down the road. But either way, if you think it's something that might be useful for your strategy, it's there. You have the ability to reduce healing, and you have the ability to cause spells to miss. So something like False Strike here will be very useful off, like, let's say, a Lightning Dragon or a False Strike Cutlass. So just upgraded Cutlass, you get a False Strike effect on there. Can be very handy on anybody that's got a counter attack effect, let's say off of an offhand shortbow. That is to say, an elemental shortbow. But either way, you can guarantee False Strike from that Cutlass. I like to keep some of these books, even though they're kind of expensive on several different unit types, just so, again, you know, if you see something like a Cockatrice in a later game or what have you, or just a lot of your heavier units that you can't deal with right now, you can go ahead and throw one of these books on them just to say, hey, look, you know, you have a chance to miss now. This might be handy, it might do nothing for you, but either way, it can be a very handy thing in the right situation. Enfeeble, same thing as Breach, except for magic stuff, and a little bit less effective, because in general, like, melee and especially ranged are held back a little bit by defenses, so as soon as defenses are breached, they just flood forward. In the case of something like Enfeeble, magic already is barely resisted, so this is kind of a minor increase, but combining with something like Fear, it can make a decent amount of difference. Dark Scale is going to inflict stagger. I guarantee you will never use this. False Flight, again, useful in those edge cases of superpowered endgame archers. Misstep, pretty much same thing with those dragons that I talked about earlier, just a little bit too niche to really come up that often, if ever. Spell Slip, again, same thing, just doesn't really come up that often. Okay, so that gets those out of the way. Just know that all of these, with practically no exception, can't be resisted in any way. Any of the ones that are on items are not going to be resistible. So whatever you throw them on, they will guaranteed, they will always inflict that debuff or buff or what have you, and nothing in the game has any immunities to them. Alright, so that gets most of them out of the way. I'm trying to think what else there is. There's going to be some more niche ones that you probably won't be here to actually see covered that much. For example, you're going to... here, where's my longbow? Switched out a couple of my longbows, and now I'm trying to figure out where on earth I left them. Let's say, Aylmer, where are you at? It's like right here we have Dark Weight, which will be inflicting Leaden. You get Leaden off of one of the Cyclops abilities, as well as the bow, as well as one of the Pumpkin abilities as well. And Leaden will cause flying units to not be able to fly, and will cause a maximum vertical movement of 1. So basically, if you're having an issue with units flying around, this is worth at least giving a shot. This isn't always going to land or anything, but it's something that can be fairly game-changing whenever it does land, especially if you're, for example, trying to recruit a Griffin or recruit a Cockatrice or something like that, or a Hawkman. You can just basically prevent them from flying for a little bit. It's not exactly, again, one that you'll see come up that often, but it's got its niche use cases, so it's there. Another one that you'll probably see even less often, if at all, is going to be coming off of, coming off of a few cases, but that's going to be Curse. So this causes a unit's health and MP to be shaved off by 20%. It causes their luck to become 0. Basically, it'll say that doom is in the stars if you look up their daily luck. And it also causes the ability to, or causes the unit to no longer have the ability to counterattack. This is primarily only going to be coming from the player side. Coming from necromancers, coming from liches with their curse abilities, as well as the supple whip, and as well as the dark priest, which will have an AoE version that can be applied to multiple units at once passively. That's probably the scariest version of it by far. And let's see, what else is there? There's also, it's technically classed as a debuff, but honestly, it depends. That's going to be the zombie status. Basically, zombie status just means that the unit in question, well, is a zombie. If they get knocked out, they can come back up on their feet within 3 rounds. Instead of bleeding out, they just live again. Now, on paper, this sounds like a kind of a perfect improvement on their situation, and back in PSP it was. There's not too many units that can exercise, but I will say, just so you know, for the sake of peace of mind, I know I've noticed, and I'm like, over time I kept thinking, like, you know, zombie was just a super overpowered thing to have on hand. But you start noticing more and more how, like, as you're going on into the post-game and what have you, more and more units will be carrying different forms of exorcism. And just for the sake of peace of mind, honestly, I just like taking zombie off those units. In many cases, I'll keep something like a living corpse ability on Liches and Palace of the Dead in order to save somebody if, you know, the clerics can't get to them. And then just end up reverting that zombie status with something like an angel or a charm of remission or what have you. But just so you know, it is a status that can exist. You know, you can just go ahead and just zombify anybody on your team that isn't unique. That's definitely one thing to probably mention. You can't turn any unique character into a zombie, and this also includes any semi-unique characters. So, for example, let's say you're wherever the hell they are. I just got replacements because the other ones died, like Sarah and Voltaire and Felicia. Despite looking like generics, they have Warren Report entries, so they're counted as unique, or they're usually called semi-uniques in their case. But the only semi-uniques are going to be any soldiers that Lenar has given you. It's kind of a weird case. Actually, no, there's one exception, and that's Captain Elrig. He comes in from Saria's side there. He's kind of his own deal here. But yeah, as far as semi-uniques go, they're just slightly better generics, but they can't become zombies. Alright, let's see. What else is there? I feel like I'm definitely missing something, and I know I'm going to feel super dumb for anything else that was missed. But really, the important stuff to bear in mind here is just kind of the ways that you can apply these debuffs can change in multiple different ways. So, for example, in many cases, if you want them to be applied quicker, you'll go for something like a blowgun. Something like Eagle Eye plus blowgun on something like a Lord here is a very effective way to simply say, hey, you're mind controlled now. Long range, mind control bow over here can also be pretty handy. Actually, a verse, that's what I forgot. So, a verse, if a unit is hit with a verse, the maximum damage of that element in a super effective state, as I understand, goes up by about 15%. Now, usually what this actually means is if you're, for example, double firing with something like a elemental longbow or what have you, that second shot's going to do more damage, or if you're hitting with an elemental late-game melee weapon, that second shot will do a little bit more. It's not something that you really plan around, it's just kind of a little bit of extra fun bonus damage that you can stack on top sometimes. And actually, that gets us to our next one that I forgot to cover, and that's going to be Instill. This is something you're going to see coming off of the Barton. So this is going to be coming initially off of something like El Colas, but it also can be applied from spells as well. So for example, your Instill abilities. Now, just so you know, Instill will give you a buff. Now, the buff is essentially a second tick of damage that will kind of vary. It's roughly in the 20 to 25% ballpark, depending on the situation. So, for example, the unit here is wind. The debuff, or the buff itself here is ice, which means that she'll get a shield. As you see, it says it does ice touched, as well as what's the other ability? Just ice attuned. Which will mean that she will essentially be able to shield herself against ice attacks, which she is weak to, so it covers her weaknesses a little bit, but the buff itself would only be about 20%, whereas if she made it air, she wouldn't have that shield anymore, but the buff would be closer to like 25%, and if the target was earth, then it would go up to about 30%. It's, again, it's just a fun little interaction. Typically, I would say, usually you just apply the Instill that the unit is weak to, so that you get that shield, so that it covers some of their weaknesses a little bit. I mean, you're still going to get a little bit of an extra damage tick. That 5 to 10% extra tick on the end usually won't matter very much. But there are cases where, for example, like let's say on something like an endgame lord or what have you, where like let's say this is a water-based weapon here, so we pick something that's got a whole lot of bonus, and then we would, like, let's say we have that ability on there, so we go ahead and we guarantee that it's going to go and drop its crit. We're going to go ahead and fire it twice. We're going to go ahead and put a Slayer on there. So let's say, in this case it's an anti-dragon bow, so we'll go ahead and put Dragon Slayer on there. We'll go ahead and put Double Shot on there, and then we'll go ahead and put, well, it's already guaranteed due to Tremendous Shot, so we don't need Eagle Eye. And dragons can't parry, so we don't need to worry about that. What else can we actually put on here? Let's see. And I guess we'll just throw out a Breach beforehand or something. Or actually, let's say they got close and they put a Lament of the Dead, right? So now all of a sudden, like, let's say this guy would have done maybe, 1 to 200 off of firing the thing normally. And realistically, if, the Fear was applied, let's say they got a Breach or whatever else, they had time to set up all of these skills at the same time, stack them on top of one another. At some point, somebody threw a Breach out at the thing. They basically would go from like 100 to 27,000 or what have you. See the Archer video for this exact thing being shown off. But mostly the idea here is just that in that particular case, if he had an Instill on hand, it would dramatically end up scaling up higher if you were to match it. But realistically, at that point, that 5 to 10% extra doesn't really matter considering how far into overkill territory it is. Whereas on the low end, it typically will be too low to really matter that much. So normally, again, just use an Instill as a shield in that particular case. That occurs to me, I probably could have just gone for something like this instead. There we go. So, anyway. Alright, what am I missing? I guess technically we should cover the... evasion abilities as well, so you also have stuff like Evade, Apostate, and what have you. These are just typically what I would call Hyper Armor abilities. So Golems will have the ability to just resist most of their damage. You'll have something like Dragons coming in with Dragon Scale, where they'll resist most of that damage and also give it back. And additionally, you'll have Knights that are, again, able to resist most of it just like a Golem, whereas something like a Hoplite or Matriarch would be able to just have a shield against it that will trigger a certain number of times. Anyway, that's about that. That's all I have time for today. Hopefully I covered them all. I'm going to feel very stupid if I forgot something like Slow, for example, which I definitely forgot. It slows things down, just like Leaden does. That one should be self-explanatory. Okay, anyway, I gotta get going. Y'all have a good one. Take care.